I don't know, but I
got
signed
a
your,
question.
thing by
What's your
mistake.
name, Wallace?
You signed?
Welcome to Ascension Parish Council Workshop, April 20th, 2017. Today we'll have a workshop on parliamentary procedure, and we're honored to have Ms. Allison Wallace here. Ms. Wallace is an attorney and professional parliamentarian. She is recognized as an expert in both Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, and the American Institute of Parliamentarians Standard Code of Parliamentary Procedure. Allison is the president of the American Institute of Parliamentarians, the clerk of the American College of Parliamentary Lawyers, a trustee for the Doms Foundation, and is active in the National Association of Parliamentarians. She is the immediate past district director of District 6 for NAP, covering the states of Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Welcome, Ms. Wallace.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I thank you all for your kind attention in this weather that we're having, and I'm real excited to talk to you all. You know, the topic, sometimes people don't think it's a jazzy topic until you want to get your way, until you want to look good when your voters watch you in the council meeting. So if you put a little bit of effort into learning some things before you have trouble, then your life as an elected official should go well. So I was told by the very hardworking AV man that when I say, yes, there it is, that when I even come close to saying PowerPoint, it would come up, and there it is. So what is parliamentary procedure? Is it some arcane set of strange rules just to trip people up so that we can say, gotcha, you can't do that? No. Is it something that some very intelligent people have really worked to give you a way to have groups of people work with other people? Because, you know, there's only one of us, and everybody else counts too, and your council equal votes. So you want to have your say, and ultimately you want to have things go your way, but you got to have some tools. So this is a proven set of rules that they have been proven for well over 100 years in many different types of entities. It may be modified. So if something is for a larger group than you are, or it's more formal or less formal, or you may modify it. So it is not rules handed down and imposed on you. You have the ability to choose your own rules, so it may be modified. It is a system where we can conduct business fairly and democratically. The balancing test is always between efficiency and fairness, so that you could have a very dictatorial chair who says this is what we will do. That's efficient. It's very efficient. It is simply not democratic. Or you could have a very democratic system where let's all talk about how we feel, and let's talk about how we feel about what they said, and like go on and on and on. Do we all love one another, and are we all in agreement? That is democratic, but it's not very efficient. So it's the balance between that. Where does this word parliamentary procedure come from? It's also known as parliamentary law. Well, it comes from British Parliament. So even though the Garden Club and the lineage clubs and the labor unions and the church bodies and all kind of groups will use it, its origin is elected bodies, and it's worth to remember that. There is a goal. The goal is to increase accuracy so that we know what we're talking about, so that you hear what they said, and to increase uniformity, and there's a virtue in that, and to be impartial. Why on earth would we use parliamentary procedure when we all know how to talk and we all know how to ask for what we want? To bring order from chaos. Even as few people as are in the room at the moment, if we all try to talk at once, nobody can hear what you're saying. If we all interrupt one another constantly and say, well, yeah, that's okay, but I got a better idea, that is not going to get you very far. In a body like this, it is essential that all members have the opportunity to participate. Can they be forced to participate? No. If you want to sit there and not speak in debate, well, sometimes that's right. You know, sometimes we all know we want to take that action or don't want to take that action. You don't have to keep talking. There's no requirement you keep talking. But if you want to talk, there's a chance for you to do so. It's also protecting the rights of a minority point of view. If you know enough, you can focus on your business, not on the procedure. So that's why spending a little time to get your thoughts together and to know the skill will help you in a real-life meeting. All right, who are these nerdy people that like parliamentary procedure? They must be impossible schoolmarm types. Well, in my opinion, the greatest American president was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson spent time to write the first parliamentary manual in the United States. He did that when he was vice president. And he wrote that he had begun a sketch for those who come after me, I'm summarizing, to fill up till a code of rules shall be formed for the use of the Senate, the effects of which may be accuracy, uniformity, and impartiality. And that's where I gave that quote from earlier. You know, Thomas Jefferson spent time in his manual, parliamentary manual, talking about courtesy in addressing the chair. He talked about when you would take your hat off. This is a 1700s situation. He talked about no one shall disturb another by getting up and walking in front of them. No one shall disturb another member by rustling their papers. And there shall be no spitting and no hissing. So sometimes people will push it, well, I have to talk to this person or whatever. You know when you're not acting appropriate in a public setting. And so this is part of parliamentary procedure, the respect for the whole body and the respect for the chair, and the chair's respect for you. Now, how do we go from parliamentary manual by Thomas Jefferson to Robert's Rules? Well, this is the book. It is 716 pages. It's very technical writing. It's very, very dry. You absolutely must add water to hydrate it where you can use it. Everything you can imagine is in here, and that's why it's your parliamentary manual. But I got a secret for y'all, and you have one by your chair. It is this wonderful little book. It's Robert's Rules of Order newly revised in brief. It's the same authors. So this is not one of the perhaps good, perhaps not good, simplified manuals. This is the 20% of this book that you really, really need, that you will use 80% of the time. And they tell you that in the foreword. It's even better than that, though, because you really, if we could get every elected official in America and every club member in America to read the first half, we would have vastly better meetings. They would be more accurate. They would be more, they would be respectful of one another, so they wouldn't be destructive, and more business would be done. So you need the parliamentary authority, but please, please read this. Has how you say things. It has in a quick, just very easy to read, but not stupid. It's not talking down to anyone. I think you'll agree that I'm right. What's even more important than Robert's Rules are the in brief book. Well, state law is more important. Council rules are more important. If there's a conflict, then your rules trump. But your rules are not 716 pages just a parliamentary procedure. Aren't you glad? So you still have to know some parliamentary procedure. All right. So where do we start? Hard to know where to start. One way to start would be letter A, agenda. Now this is pretty structured because you are, by law, required to have a certain order of business. So it's already listed in your governing documents. You don't have to think about where does this go. It goes there. And that's nice. Be prepared if you need to move something around for, someone is not going to be here for a later part of the meeting, be prepared to handle that. I am moving a little bit fast so that I can take a few questions as we get to the end. Now, this brings me to a wonderful little secret time saver. I don't know whether y'all do this or not, but there's something called unanimous or general consent. And what this is for a non-controversial item, not for something that there's protesters outside, okay? For a non-controversial item, you may say, the chair would say, Ms. Green has to leave. Is there any objection to taking up agenda item number 12 at this time? People pause. If you have an objection, that's fine. It's not anything alarming. Simply say, I object. And then you'll go through it, and you might vote to do it, or you might vote not to do it. And there's no reason to ruffle your feathers. But it's a wonderful time saver. Instead of saying, may I have a motion, or thinking you can't do it. It's perfectly okay to say that there'll be an objection. Don't not object and then complain about it later. That your non-objection is a type of vote. And unanimous consent is a type of vote because you've agreed to do something. So if you don't agree to do it and you really want to, take a stand, then take the stand. You are a council, so we'll talk about methods of voting, but really there's only two that I'm going to mention for you. In your garden club or your model railroad club or your condominium association, one of those other bodies. You might vote by voice, which is where the president would say, all in favor say aye, all opposed say no. The ayes have it. We will hold a picnic. Okay? You might have a rising vote, which is used when something requires a 2/3 vote or more. And the chairman in such a meeting would say, all in favor, please rise, be seated. And the pause is while you're looking at who's rising. All opposed, please rise, be seated. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. There's also a secret ballot. You cannot use the secret ballot system in your elected capacity. And there's the unanimous consent we just spoke of, and there's roll call, where the secretary or someone will, in a systematic fashion, call the results of the way you vote is known, so that a roll call vote is the exact opposite of a ballot vote. A ballot vote is anonymous. So you will be voting publicly. Voting thresholds. This is something that people get really, really wrong. They uniformly get this wrong in big numbers and small numbers. And I do a little trick sometimes where I would have people write on a card what is a majority of, and I'll name a certain number. It's amazing how often people get it wrong. A majority means more than half. Now you got to know more than half of whom. Like, will the vote be adopted by those who are simply present? If a majority adopt, these are both parliamentary and legal questions. You have to know them before you start. Before you don't want to get in the controversy and then try to dig your way out where you're looking for a certain result. 2/3, and we're going to talk about why you need to know 2/3. Your governing documents, your bylaws, have adopted Robert's Rules of Order. So Robert's Rules of Order has certain, I call them parliamentary motions, like previous question. I move the previous question. We don't normally go around speaking of that in our real lives. Previous question requires a 2/3 vote. So it's not a majority vote. And when it's a roll call vote, you'll be able to, you don't have to have that rising vote because you'll be able to tell 2/3. So some things need a 2/3, some things need a majority vote. Unanimous consent satisfies that requirement in both cases. So this little cheat sheet, this yellow cheat sheet, has two categories. One is ranking motions. The bottom one is main motion, and we're going to come back to this. How is a main motion adopted? Under this little chart, can you interrupt somebody to make a main motion? And you will see that you cannot, because there's no little I. Does it need a second? Yes, it does. Is it debatable? Yes. Is it amendable? Yes. Does it require a majority vote? Yes. And then there is whether it can be reconsidered. For this, that might be kind of simple, but wait till you get some motions all stacked up and somebody moves to lay something on the table and you're like, what vote is required? So even before you can go to this little book or the big book, you can go to this chart. And the answer is the same whether it's a popular motion or whether you're smooth as you make it or whether you're kind of stumbling. And that's that uniformity. So we will kind of come back to that, but I wanted to mention there's different voting thresholds and then there's different types of motions. You have, sometimes in governing documents, you will name, instead of saying a percentage, you will say, like for example in yours, the council may authorize a special meeting by the call of the president or by 4 votes. So you don't need to know what percentage, you don't need to know how many are voting even. You need to know, do you have 4 votes? So it can be spelled out nice and clear. All right. Main motions are the main thing because a main motion introduces a subject. It's a resolution. Only one main motion can be considered at a time, and it must be disposed of before another motion can be considered. Now, disposed of, it might mean adopted, it might mean rejected, it might mean sent to committee. There's different things that disposed of can mean, but we're not talking about the park and then the bridge and then the stop signs all at one time. Main motions require a second. What happens if a motion doesn't get a second? Yes, the chair will kind of look around. You should be paying attention. Chair might even say, is there a second? There being no second, the motion is not before you. Don't second motions if you don't like them because it's wasting your time. And you need, that's a learning because sometimes people think you have to do that. You don't. Main motions are debatable and they are amendable. All of these things go through the chair. And that is something that Thomas Jefferson and Henry M. Robert and every parliamentary author works on. You gain recognition by saying, Mr. Chairman, or depending on who's presiding, Madam President, or whatever the case may be, then the chair assigns the floor. The chair gives preference and recognition to the person who made the motion if they seek the floor. Otherwise, it's the person who spoke first. In a main motion, if a main motion is on the floor, you may say, oh, I urge your support of this wonderful motion. You may make amendments. I move to amend by inserting at a cost not to exceed $500,000 or whatever your amendment is. Majority vote is required to adopt. And you could always look at your chart if you forget. Let me talk about the steps to a main motion. And I know that you are experienced officials, but it's still worth kind of like, let's start at the beginning. We can move fast, but we do need to start at the beginning. And I'm looking for something in here. Okay. All right. First thing is a member makes a motion. Now, y'all have to do your, you have to give notice. So there's some things that are special for you. Another member seconds the motion. The chair states the question. Now, the chair does not have to read a 10-page resolution out loud, but the chair does need to direct you to the question before you is on the resolution to, and tell us the number of it and it's on the screen and all that. The chair will then say, is there any discussion? He might say, is there any debate? Discussion and debate are really the same thing. You may then make your remarks in debate. If someone does one of these parliamentary things, or they make an amendment, say, you get to speak and debate on the amendment. So all of your times are running again. They're starting again. It's very nice the way you have visible time here. The default rule for how long you can speak and debate, and when I say the default rule, the rule out of the big book, because you don't have anything that I'm aware of that overrides it. A member may speak 10 minutes in debate on a motion. Then, if everyone has spoken who wishes to speak, the member may speak another 10 minutes on that motion. And I told you, if there's an amendment, you get to speak again for 10 minutes and then again for 10 minutes. And I suggest that's a rather long time. We would hope that several things will happen. First, we would hope people won't talk if they don't have a contribution. Then you can adopt rules that, for everybody, lower the length of time. 10 minutes is pretty long. Then there is that famous move the previous question. But it has to be done correctly. It's a useful motion. What you would do is, when no one else is speaking, you would gain the chair's recognition and say, Mr. Chairman, I move the previous question. And then he would say, is there a second? If there's a second, then he would say the previous question has been moved. The effect of this is to stop debate and we vote immediately. All in favor of the previous question, say aye. All opposed say no. Or you might do the vote in a different way. I'm just, because you got to be able to hear it. And it might be done by roll call, or it might be done by show of hand or something. If there is 2/3 in favor of stopping debate, the chair will say the previous question was called. We will now vote. The question before you is, and he will direct your attention to what you were talking, the issue. If a member is speaking in debate and somebody from his chair says, call the question. Some people say, ignore that. Why would you ignore it? Because it's not being done properly. Because you have to get recognition from the chair. Now, I think it's good the first time to say, all real sweet, the chair would remind all members that they must address the chair to be recognized. And the chair has assigned the floor to member X, and member X is speaking now. All right. Maybe if they do it another time, the chair should say, the chair informs the member that that motion must be made after getting recognition, and you may not interrupt another member to make that motion. If you get recognition in the future, the chair will recognize you. And at this time, that motion is not before you. And a few times of that, it should solve itself. Okay. Notice how optimistic. All right. So we were talking about debate. Now, if the hour is late and everybody keeps talking, the chair can do several things. He can say, we've heard from those in favor. Would anyone like to speak against? And he could actually alternate points of view at any point. Or people have been speaking. The chair could say, is there anyone with any new thoughts to add? And you can kind of hope that that will work, and sometimes it does. But it's the member's right to speak and debate, so the chair cannot cut it off on his own, and even one member cannot cut it off. Like it has to, that's got to be self-enforced. But finally, when all members have stopped talking, or if the previous question was successfully called, the chair will put the question to a vote. Remind them what they're voting on, and that will be on the screen. If you have any doubt as to what you're voting on, you may say, Mr. Chairman, there was so much discussion and the screens aren't working. Would the chair please tell us what we're voting on? Because you have an absolute right to know what you're voting on. Finally, after the results of the vote, which is, I think you all do by roll call on your resolutions, then the chair, not any other person, the chair will, the council secretary might say there are 6 in the affirmative and 5 in the negative. But the chair will say whether it was passed or not. Okay. And it's just always worth remembering that. To speak in debate, members must gain recognition from the chair. If 2 or more speak at the same time, the chair will try to get whoever spoke first. Preference is given to the maker of the motion. Second, the purpose of a second is to be sure that somebody wants this, besides the maker, wants this to be heard. You may be opposed to the motion and still second it. You might feel that this is something we should discuss. Let's get it out. So you can second it. The name of the seconder, unless you have a special rule, the name of the seconder does not go in the minutes. Now, you might have some kind of special rule, but usually that isn't the case. Some people think it's like in the legislature where you're endorsing a bill. It's not really that. It's really saying, like, let's discuss this. And we talked about if it doesn't get a second, it's not before you. So the chair will take the motion, repeat the exact words, or refer to it very precisely and say the question before you is on the adoption of resolution 123. Are you ready for the question? And after the debate, we've talked about debate. Debate must be germane to that question. If an amendment is made, it must be germane to the amendment. So germane means relevant. So yes, we can sort of say everything relates to the price of tea in China, but let's don't go too far because we're trying to focus. So the chair has a duty to keep all debate germane, and if you're off topic, the chair has a duty to say, Mr. Member, please keep your remarks germane. Then if the member doesn't, Mr. Member, the chair will ask you not to go into that. We're on this motion. And ultimately, the chair could say, that is not germane to the motion before you. And we will not hear any further remarks in that vein. The chair must enforce rules of decorum in debate, and members should be enforcing this too. You don't point, and you don't say, you don't make personal remarks. You don't say, yeah, he always says that and he never does win, and here he goes again with another losing theory. You keep the remarks about the issue. I'm not saying that could happen, but it's worth remembering. If it does, then the chair actually has, this is a duty put on the chair. There's a number of duties that the big book has for the chair, such as opening the meeting at the proper time, announcing the proper sequence, recognizing members who are entitled to the floor, to state and put to vote all questions that legitimately come before the body, to protect the assembly from obviously dilatory motions by refusing to recognize them. An obviously dilatory motion would be something that's clearly wasting your time. And parliamentary procedure is about using these skills to do your business. It's not about showing off. It's not about throwing monkey wrenches into the real will of the body. So the chair can actually say, the chair rules that motion dilatory and will not process it. Now, what's your remedy? What's your remedy? You can appeal the decision of the chair. However, you need a majority vote to prevail. So I suspect in a lot of councils, if the chair would not process certain things, they probably would be upheld because there can be such a thing as a dilatory motion. The chair has a duty to enforce rules relating to debate and order and decorum within the assembly. The chair has a duty to expedite business in every way compatible with the rights of members. Chair decides all questions of order subject to appeal. The chair has a duty to respond to inquiries of members relating to parliamentary procedure or factual information. So let's say somebody is a new member of the council and they have never been an elected official before, and they don't know how to have a committee study something. That individual, it's totally proper. The individual can say, Mr. Chairman, I would like to send this to a committee, but I don't know how to word that. Will the chair help me? And so that's perfectly fine. Same thing with, is it in order to move the previous question? Is it in order to appeal the chair? What vote is required for? So there's a whole lot of things. Put it all on the chair if you need to, because you have a right. You have a right to these things, and it's the chair's duty. Okay. Remember, so members speaking in debate will stick to the subject. They will avoid personalities. They will not impugn the motives of another. When there's no further debate, the chair will move to taking a vote. There's a lot of rules. This is the ranking motions on your chart. The ranking motions, some of them are very common. They have rank. If you have a main motion, you could have all of these things. But if you have these things, you can only have what's higher than them. And that's not really our subject for today. But that's what I mean by ranking motions. There's also motions that do not have rank. And there are some things that you hear pretty often, like request for information. You can do that whenever you need to do that. There's a whole thorny, complicated category of bring back motions, which is essential, and it's also very headache-inducing, like can you reconsider the vote on something, or can you rescind certain action? And that is not our topic today, but that is something that you have to master. All right, debate. There should not be any private conversations going on. Private by the way of friendly or by the way of hostile. So you shouldn't be like, and you better not say that again. And you also shouldn't be like, it just shouldn't be done. And if the chair sees that done, the chair should stop that. The only people speaking should be given the floor by the chair. Okay. Finally, the chair will put the question to vote, repeating the motion or at least directing your attention to it. You will be voting by roll call. No member should, this may be aspirational, but you really should maintain the integrity of the voting. So you should not get up during the voting process. And you certainly should not be talking loudly during the voting process. You should, wait for your name and then vote. And then be quiet while others are. Don't interrupt the voting process. Then the chair will announce the results of the vote. And then the chair will move to the next order of business. Okay. Parliamentary procedure is based on motions, so that's the skill that you just have to have. Don't be overwhelmed by all of these motions on this. Read this little yellow book, the first half of the little yellow book. Some things you will not see, such as postpone indefinitely. You probably won't see that. Raise a question of privilege, that's of the assembly. Well, maybe you would see that. Call for the orders of the day. That's if there's deviation from the order of business. But some of it you will see, like you will have to deal with amendments. You will have to deal with referring to committee. Takes a little patience, takes a little practice, takes a lot of effort. There are extremely detailed rules. So rather than go over all of them, I think I went in the wrong direction because I held it upside down. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we're going backwards. Okay. It did work. I still am going up, but okay, I went all the way. Okay. There's categories of motions that we don't really have to deal with right now. This is a chart that you have a better one. That's the ranking motions. Just the point being, there's going to be a different vote required for some of these. Some of them have rank, and then there's going to be all these little rules. Okay. So postpone indefinitely is not a very common motion. It's when you want to kill something, but you don't want to talk about it. It's kind of polite. I move to postpone indefinitely that resolution. It has to be voted by majority. So if you have that, that's what that means. Amendment. Amendment allows for changes to be made in the motion. It is very specific. And sometimes people will say, I don't want it to mean that. I want it to mean the such and such. No, we must have the words. We must have where you want the words to change and how you want the words to be. So if there's a resolution on the screen, tell me after the word motion and before the word allows, to use what's on the screen, I want to insert the phrase at a reasonable time. I'm just trying to make something up. But you're very, very precise. You're not telling what you want it to be. You're telling the words. Am I clear? I might not be clear. Okay. The amendment must be germane to the motion. So if you're talking about the bridge, you're not going to talk about what holidays you'll have. Only 2 degrees of amendment can be pending. You can make a motion to amend, then another motion to amend that can be made. You can't make 3 at a time, because that would be just too much fun. Okay. And remember, you're only talking about the debate on the motion to amend. So you vote on the motion to amend. If it's adopted, it has changed the main motion. If it's not adopted, forget it. It's over. So this is why you have to have, it sounds easier to do than it actually is. And that's why you need that screen and you need that precision and tell me exactly where and exactly how you want it changed. You keep going back down so that if you're voting on an amendment, you might vote for an amendment and then against the main motion. You might have a series of amendments, they all get voted down, and the main motion, like it originally was, might get adopted. Or you might spend a whole lot of time on it and everything gets voted down. But at all times, it's a little slow. But you know that phrase, hurry up, slow down to hurry up. Doing it very methodically and systematically, it really will help you. Even if the motion requires something besides 2/3 vote, the amendments require 2/3 vote. You cannot put a not in there because here's why. Okay, the council member moved to build a new park. You can't say I move to amend by inserting not build a new park. You just vote no, and it doesn't get adopted. And there is a reason to have a negative motion sometimes, but do that with the greatest care because people are going to be confused, and especially if you have debate and you have amendments, make it as simple as possible. You really want to be precise. There's a certain way to make amendments so that the phrase is add if you're using it at the end of a line. The phrase is strike if you're doing something inside. Now, many people will say the word delete, and I don't actually get upset about that because I think what's important is do we know what we're talking about? But the precise, correct language is strike. So the member would say, I move to strike playground and insert volleyball court. Okay? That's a strike and insert, but the preferred language is strike. And again, we're telling exactly what words we will strike, and if it's a strike and insert, you're telling exactly what words you would insert. There is a complicated one to move to substitute. That is where you're moving to substitute a lengthy series of paragraphs. There is an issue with that for a public body because you have to give your notice. I guess you would be giving notice, and I don't know whether you could finally move a substituted motion and complete it at that time because of the notice requirements. But anyway, the takeaway point is know exactly what language you want to change, know exactly how you want to change the language, then vote on the amendment. It's a majority vote. As you debate, you're only debating the amendment at that point. It gets real hard, but it'll work if you do it the right way. Then keep track of whether the motion is adopted, the motion to amend is adopted. If so, it's affected the main motion, but you still vote on the main motion. You're just voting on it as amended. If it's rejected, then it's just forget about it. All right, another one that's fairly common in every kind of body is to refer to a different group. You could refer to a certain named committee. You could refer to the legal department. There's certain groups that it can be referred to. Do this if you want to have further study or a recommendation, or you might do it. You might do it strategically. I can't say that that's not done, because it's very common to send things to committee, and I don't know any history here, but name the committee, and you might name when you want them to come back and report, or you might give them a little more leeway. You probably will not authorize them to do something. In voluntary organizations, you sometimes will send to a committee and give them power to do it. Like in a little club I'm in, we wanted a projector to be purchased. We created a special committee, and we said, go ahead and purchase it. We don't want you coming back going, I can get one for $300, and then we go away and we come back the next month and the price is no longer $300. You're probably wanting a recommendation. Okay. Another one is to postpone to a certain time. Again, you may have limits on how far you can postpone things. You can use this strategically also, because you may know who's there for one meeting and who's going to be there for the next meeting. That's not an improper purpose. It's not wrong to use strategy. It's wrong to use unequal strategy. And I just mention it because you see this done for that reason. But if you want to delay it for that meeting or for the next meeting, you can move to postpone and name the time. Limit or extend limits of debate. And this one is real important. It's similar to move the previous question. It's not exactly the same. You might want to extend how long you can talk about something, or you might want to reduce it. It takes a 2/3 vote to adopt this. If you want to do it, you could say, I move to limit discussion on this subject to 30 minutes. And that means no matter what is done, after 30 minutes on the clock, the chair will say time is up and we will now vote. You might say, I move that we only have one speech per council member. You might say, I move to extend and give each council member 20 minutes. It requires 2/3 to adopt. Previous question, you close debate, you vote immediately. You don't have any more amendments, and you don't have any more debate. If you have a series of motions, that main motion, a motion to amend, a motion to amend the amendment, a motion to refer to committee, which you could have all of those, and someone moves the previous question, if they don't specify, really and truly, it's only the last thing. That's not what they meant. They meant to get, or rarely. So the chair would say, are you moving the previous question on all pending motions? And they probably will very gratefully say, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. And then you would vote to move the previous question. If you want to keep talking about it, vote no. And then that's the 2/3 vote that we discussed. Lay on the table. This is something people will say table. Technically, it's lay on the table, and it's really not used correctly many times. It really means you want to set aside the pending question very temporarily when something urgent has come up. Urgent doesn't mean an emergency, but the governor walks in, you don't want to make him wait. you can lay things on the table and take him right away. Here's the point to remember. If it gets laid on the table, it stays there unless it's taken from the table. So it needs a motion to take it from the table. If that doesn't happen, okay, you had a motion, it was laid on the table, that doesn't happen. It could be taken from the table at the next meeting. But if it doesn't happen then it's gone. Can it be made again? Yes, it can be made again. But all of those timelines and notice requirements they will start over. Okay? Call for orders of the day. I don't know if y'all ever hear that. But that would be where you have a legally required order of business. But let's say you're just not doing it. Some member could say, I call for the orders of the day. You can't interrupt, and that's on your chart. Call for the orders of the day. The chair should say, if it's correct, the chair should say, thank you, Mr. Member. The orders of the day have been called. We will now move to such and such. And the same thing with a point of order. A point of order is saying there's something done wrong in the procedure. It's not necessarily hostile. Might be hostile, but it doesn't have to be hostile. You can't tug on people's sleeves in the meeting. You want to say, oh, that requires 2/3 vote. You can't whisper. So how else are you going to say it? Point of order, that requires, the chair would say, state your point. That requires 2/3 vote. If you are right, the chair would say, point well taken. That requires 2/3 vote. We will now vote with a 2/3 vote requirement. The chair might not agree with you, and the chair would say, point not well taken. The chair did such and such for whatever the reason is. Then you live with that unless you really, really hate it and you appeal. Okay? All right. Question of privilege of the assembly. This is usually the sound of hammers or the room's too hot. It's not about just you. It's about the whole assembly. Usually that's handled by unanimous consent. Recess, short break in the meeting. People do know what a recess means. It's very good to name how long the recess will be. In my personal opinion, there's no such thing as a recess that's less than 10 minutes long, because I've never seen any group of people come back in 5 minutes. I just never have seen that. So you might want to say 10 minutes, and you might want to say at 6:01, or whatever that time would be. Members may move for a recess. The chair may ask if there's any objection to a recess. If you have an objection, object, and then it'll be voted on. Can recess be used to disrupt proceedings and waste your time? Yes. So, you always have to think about it. Maybe there is a good reason, but maybe you'd like to not keep having recesses. So you have the right to assert yourself. And then there's adjourn. Everybody knows what adjourn means. By the way, there's a few tricks. Before the chair adjourns, the chair should say, is there any business to come before the body before we adjourn? And he looks at you. Even if you have completed the agenda, there could be notice of something that you're going to give. There could be things that they have a right to come before that meeting. So the chair should say, with a pause, is there anything further to come before this meeting before we adjourn? The time of adjournment is listed in the minutes. There should never be any doubt whether the meeting is in session or not. And believe it or not, that can occur. I'm not saying here. I'm saying I've seen things where, maybe what if it's the time for the meeting, everybody's in here, the mics are all on, some things were held, there was a recess, but it wasn't clearly stated that recess is over, and there's certain things. You see how a certain amount of policing drive on the right side of the road and stop at the red light. It saves lives. Fix the time to which to adjourn. You could have this. You have governmental requirements since your meetings are open. The purpose of this is to go another day without adjourning this meeting. I don't know if you have any special rules for going over. Okay, well, let's say you have some hot issues, and it's midnight, and you haven't gone through all of the agenda. I hope this doesn't happen, but you could say, I move that when we adjourn to meet tomorrow at 6 p.m. in council chambers. That's the same meet, if adopted, that's the same meeting. So it will save you in notice requirements. Okay. The troubling category, and I'm going to stop after I've mentioned the troubling category and take any questions. Troubling category is bring back motions. Of course, we don't want to say that if you once vote on something, you can never change it. That is how the world changes. By action being taken one day, then a deliberative body thinks about it again, and a different result is reached. That is good. But you do not want to have a state of uncertainty where every time the council meets, all of the rules change, and all of the, like, what if every time the council met, the dogs in the playground, I hope y'all don't have any issues about that, but like you don't want one meeting you can do this, and then the next meeting that's against an ordinance. You want to have stability, not frozen, but not ever changing either. So to adopt something takes a majority vote. To change it may take something different. So we talked about take from the table. That's a bring back motion. We'll mention that there's a motion to rescind. You may take action that the council voted, and you may move to rescind it. Or you may move to amend something previously adopted where you're going to modify it. You just have to know that you have to know what laws are in place and take that action carefully. To discharge a committee, to reconsider. Reconsider is something I get a lot of questions about. It's very, very tricky because we use English. Of course, you could always reconsider something in the sense that, can you think about it and consider it? But in a parliamentary sense, there's a motion to reconsider the vote. It's a highly technical, tricky motion, and sometimes you can't do it because it can only be made on the same day. It can only be made by someone who voted on the prevailing side. If you want to change some of your laws, there's something else that you might do, but it's not that motion. Okay, and I see we're getting close to time. Are there any questions for me while I'm here today?
Councilman Satterley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you so much for an excellent and informative presentation. I have two very quick questions. So you mentioned a vote is forced on a motion that is, once it's amended twice. There are no third turns, I guess. So let's say there is a vote then, and it fails, then what?
Okay. What I need to convey is you can have an unlimited number of amendments to a motion. They can be unlimited, but they can't be all pending. So you can have a main motion, then a motion to amend, then another motion to amend that. At that point, you can't have another motion to amend. You have to start disposing of them. So
the answer is you would vote on that, and if it failed, it goes back to an earlier motion, or
yes, sir.
Or the chair asks for a new one?
If it fails, you pretend it didn't happen. And so now there was a main motion and a primary amendment. There was a secondary amendment. The secondary amendment failed. You're back to the primary amendment. You can make another secondary motion.
Okay.
And you could keep doing that for a while. You just can't have more than 3 levels because you could have the main motion, primary, and secondary at one time.
And quickly, would you address the difference in laying something on the table and deferring?
They are very similar. Laying on the table is done because there's something urgent that's come up. Usually it's a scheduling issue, or it might be a technological issue. Deferring or, in the parliamentary term, is postponed to a certain time. That has rules for how long can you send something, how long can you defer or postpone something. So you can usually do it, if there's no special rule, you can do it to the next meeting. And the same with lay on the table. Lay on the table will not come back unless you take it from the table. Now, you could make the motion again, but that one would be gone. Whereas postpone to a certain time, like you name the next meeting, it will come up because you postponed it.
So if I understand you correct, in tabling something, it's usually used for, as you said, scheduling, so, but later in that same meeting, it's covered, but if not, you can go another meeting. But then if it's not, then it goes away forever unless it's brought back up.
Yes, sir.
Versus defer, you can just name 3 meetings from now, or give a time frame, or,
That would be true, but it may not be true for a governmental body because you can't like postpone something a year in the future. You could and I'm
But you
not
can
sure you can
postpone
postpone it
indefinitely.
3 meetings.
but you could postpone, you said indefinitely.
Yes, sir. And that means it's gone away. Like, if that's adopted,
That is used to make it go away.
yes,
Thank
yes. Yeah. I appreciate it.
Councilman Lawler, I have one more question.
Okay, just a brief one. Where is the line between to substitute and then to add, strike, and insert, or is it like obscenity? You know it when you see it.
Yeah. It actually is a very bright line. All of the first 3 categories, add, strike, and insert, they all relate to words, so that you have text and they relate to words. The substitute relates to paragraphs.
So phrases would be included in that
Yes.
words.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Wallace. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. We'll take a few minutes.
Then we'll get a meeting.